So, one of the more disappointing things we as election administrators hear from time to time, fortunately it's not too often, is that I don't vote because my vote doesn't count or my vote won't count. And that's really distressing for us as election administrators to hear. And part of what we do is we try to go out into the community, into the schools, into the public forums, and explain the process to say, no, your vote really does count. And I'll take that in two different in two different ways. One, that it physically is not counted by election officials, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We often hear that about, there's still a misconception that absentee ballots, or what are now called vote-by-mail ballots in the state of Florida, are only counted if the election's really close, and that's couldn't be further from the truth. They're actually the first ballots that get counted in most counties in the state of Florida, because we're allowed to, up to 2 weeks out from election day, to begin tabulating absentee ballots or vote-by-mail ballots. And there's very strict procedures in place where you've got checks and balances, the number of ballots that were sent, the number of ballots that were received back, and then those have to be the envelopes that contain the ballot have to be balanced out with the ballots and the final vote count. So there's a lot of procedures to make sure literally every single ballot is accounted for. Also, of course, the same process holds true during early voting and absentee voting. And we go to great lengths to make sure that every vote is accounted for, every voter who showed up to vote is accounted for. And so we pride ourselves in making sure that every person that legally casts a ballot has that ballot tabulated. Now, secondly, my vote doesn't count, meaning it's not going to matter at the end of the day. And let me just give you a couple of for instances here locally in Escambia County, and then some other counties in the state, and then across the state of Florida. My first election that I conducted with candidates in it back in 2005, there was a county commission race that at the end of election night, the top two candidates were separated by a grand total of 3 votes. And then we went through a machine recount process and then a manual recount process, and at the end of that entire process there was only 5 votes separating the two, and of course the individual with 5 more votes won and went on to become a county commissioner for actually several terms here in Escambia County. And I remember having a conversation with the other candidate indicating, boy, I had a lot of people that I could have reached out to, a lot more people that I know that didn't bother turning out in the polls, and if I'd have just had knocked on one more door or asked one more family to come out and vote for me, that could have put me over the edge. So every single little vote really does matter. Another instance, Escambia County has an elected superintendent of schools now, thanks to a single vote that was cast here in our county. There was a there's been several referendums on the ballot to change from an elected to an appointed superintendent of schools. The first time that appeared on the ballot, it was at the end of election day and of the entire process. A single vote cast in opposition to changing it from elected to appointed carried the day, so the position stayed as elected versus appointed. Been on the ballot several times. It's not been nearly that close since then. So one single vote matters. All right, we've actually had just in this past election cycle, some of my colleagues that have had to literally draw cards, draw straws, flip coins, because they've had contests within their particular county that ended in a dead tie. At the end of recounts and everything else, there was 2 candidates had the equal number of votes. And under Florida law, there's actually it says it's a game of chance. So you draw a card, you flip a coin, you draw straws, and it's merely by chance which of the 2 people win. So again, there's instances of ties. And then finally, perhaps the most famous recent close election in the state of Florida was the 2000 presidential election. Those of you who are familiar with it know that at the end of election day, everything hinged on the state of Florida. Whoever won Florida would win the presidency and become the leader of the free world for the next 4 and then ultimately 8 years. At the end of the day, once all of the recounting that was stopped and started and all of that was completed, the vote total separation in the entire state of Florida was 537 votes. Just to put that in perspective, at the time, Escambia County, at the time was probably the 18th or 19th largest county, 17th, 18th, 19th largest county in the state. One single county, our county, we had 90 precincts. So it had 6 votes, the margin of 6 votes changed per precinct. That's how small that margin is. You could have had a different outcome. And then not to mention that, the large, huge counties with hundreds of thousands, millions of, over 1 million voters. So really, every single vote really does matter, and I believe it's our duty as citizens. It certainly is a right, but it's also a responsibility, a duty as a citizen of the United States to participate in elections. And I certainly hope and encourage everyone to do so. So what are some of the checks and balances to prevent people that shouldn't be registered to vote from registering to vote, or fictional people, etc.? Well, a lot of that has changed in recent times. Since 2006, Florida has moved to a statewide voter database. And why that's significant is prior to that, each individual county, Florida's 67 counties, had their own database. And they maintained that. And there was some information sharing among the 67 counties, but there wasn't a unified statewide system. Part of the aftermath of the 2000 election, reforms at the federal and the state level, resulted in states having to create some form of statewide voter registration system. So in Florida, that's called the Florida Voter Registration System, FVRS. And part of the registration process is people register to vote in a couple of different ways. There's a paper application that's about a dozen questions you have to answer, and then you complete those questions and turn that into a voter registration official. Or you can register in person. Clearly, you can go into a voter registration office, whether it's a elections office or, for instance, where we get most of our registrations now, and that's through the driver's license folks, which here locally are run by the tax collector's office. And part of that process is you have to provide, in addition to all the other basic information, your name, your date of birth, a legal residential address, and it does have to be a legal residential address. You can't use a post office box, you can't use a business address. And then we have a comprehensive list of allowable residential addresses. You also have to provide, if you have one, a Florida driver's license number or a Florida ID card number. If you have neither of those, then you have to provide the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. And if you have neither of those, then you actually have to affirm that you have neither of those, and that again is verified. So what happens then is once we enter that system into the Florida voter registration system, and remember, these are applicants at this point. They're, you say, are you going to register to vote? Which in essence, what you're doing is you're applying to register to vote. You're not registered until a voter registration official, myself and my 66 colleagues, say that you're registered in the state of Florida. But once that information is entered into the Florida voter registration system, there is a verification that's done. And that's done at the statewide level. And so that driver's license number, ID card number, last 4 digits of your Social Security are verified. And then that information comes back to us. We then can activate that voter, fully register that voter, and make them an active voter in the state of Florida. So there are checks and balances. There's the misconception that people say, well, Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck can register if they're not registering in person. That's not the case. There are verification procedures that are completed during the voter registration process. So I often get the question, how are people in jail allowed to vote? They hear these rumors or what have you that people in jail are voting. And so let me take a minute or two to explain what the process is like here in the state of Florida. Under Florida law, if you're convicted of a felony, then you lose your right to vote. The other instance of a person losing their right to vote is if they've been declared by court as being mentally incapacitated. But let's focus on the former, being convicted of a felony, whether it's in the state of Florida or somewhere else. If you're a registered voter in the state of Florida, you lose your right to vote. And so again, it's important. You're saying convicted of a felony. So you have people that are either accused of crimes and awaiting adjudication in some form or fashion, or have been adjudicated at some lesser level. Let's say a misdemeanor, they've been charged with and convicted of a misdemeanor, or they've had adjudication withheld, etc. So the tipping point, if you will, that initiates the removal procedures under Florida law is convicted of a felony. So you have actually people that are awaiting trial, accused of crimes, awaiting trial, have not been convicted. They, under Florida law, if they're registered to vote, are still able to participate in an election. We actually have meetings with the folks at the county level who run the jail to set up a procedure for people who wish to participate that may not actually be able to go to their polling place or an early voting site to complete the process by mail. Those persons that are convicted of a felony, there are notice and removal procedures. They don't just aren't automatically pulled off the rolls. There's a fairly lengthy procedure we have to go through to notify them that they have been identified as a person having been convicted of a felony. They have an opportunity to respond, say in writing, and here's some information indicating that that's incorrect, or even request an administrative hearing with me to say, here's evidence that says that information is incorrect. They're removed and ineligible unless and until their civil rights as it relates to voting are restored. And that can be a fairly lengthy process these days in the state of Florida. And that's done through the Office of Executive Clemency in Tallahassee, Florida. And then once we get notified of that, a person can reapply to vote, and then their rights are fully restored. So that's the process, and that's how people that could be actually in jail can vote in the state of Florida.